The gunshot that changed Cordelia Kincaid's life echoed through Lewiston, Idaho, on a sweltering August afternoon in 1876, when the dust hung so thick in the air that even the sun looked like it was trying to hide. Cordelia had been arranging dried wildflowers in the front window of her modest apothecary when the commotion erupted across the street. A man stumbled out of the bank, blood blossoming across his shirt, his eyes wide with panic as he scanned the street. Their gazes locked for just an instant before he disappeared down the narrow alley between the saloon and the telegraph office. She might have forgotten him entirely, just another victim of Lewiston's increasingly lawless streets, if not for the trail of blood that led directly to her back door 3 hours later. The knock came just as she was closing shop. 3 soft taps, barely audible over the sound of her sweeping. When she opened the door, the man from the bank collapsed into her arms, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please," he whispered, pressing something cold and metal into her palm. "They think I took it. I didn't. Hide this. Don't tell them I was here." Before she could respond, his eyes rolled back, and the full weight of him nearly took her to the floor. Cordelia managed to drag him inside, kicking the door shut behind them. Only then did she look down at what he'd given her, a silver pocket watch with intricate engravings and a key. She didn't know it then, but this stranger, this Miles Donovan, would unravel everything she thought she knew about justice, loyalty, and her own heart. Cordelia had come to Lewiston 2 years prior, after her father's passing left her with nothing but his medical books and a small inheritance, just enough to start the apothecary in this growing frontier town. At 26, she'd already resigned herself to spinsterhood, content with her independence and the respect she'd earned as a healer, despite the initial suspicion of a woman practicing such a trade. Now, with an unconscious, bleeding man on her floor, that hard-won respectability was at risk. "Mister," she said, tapping his cheek gently. "Mister, I need to tend to that wound." When he didn't respond, Cordelia moved quickly, gathering her supplies. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder, which was both a blessing and a curse. Less probing required, but more blood loss. She worked methodically, cutting away his shirt, cleaning the wound, applying a poultice of yarrow and honey before bandaging him tightly. It was only after she'd finished that she truly looked at his face. Strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard, straight nose and dark lashes that rested against tanned skin. A face weathered by sun and hardship, but handsome nonetheless. A cowboy, judging by his clothes and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his days in the saddle. But what had he been doing in the bank? And why had someone shot him? The pocket watch and key were still clutched in her hand. Cordelia slipped them into the hidden pocket of her skirt, just as another knock came at her front door, not the gentle tapping from before, but the authoritative pound of a fist. "Miss Kincaid, Sheriff Evans here. Need a word with you." Cordelia glanced down at the unconscious man, then to the blood-stained rags beside him. She quickly shoved the evidence under her work table, spread a blanket over the man, and arranged several herb bundles to partially obscure his form before hurrying to the front. She smoothed her apron and hair, took a deep breath, and opened the door with a practiced smile. "Sheriff Evans, what brings you by so late?" The sheriff, a barrel-chested man with a graying mustache that seemed perpetually stained with tobacco, removed his hat. "Evening, Miss Kincaid. There was an incident at the bank today. Man shot the teller and made off with a considerable sum." "How terrible," Cordelia gasped, putting just the right amount of alarm in her voice. "Is Mr. Patterson all right?" "Flesh wound. He'll live." Sheriff Evans glanced past her into the dim shop. "Thing is, we tracked the blood trail to this general area before losing it. Thought you might have treated someone with a bullet wound today. Cordelia widened her eyes. Goodness, no. I've had a quiet day, just Mrs. Hollister for her rheumatism and young Tommy Wilson with a bee sting. The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. Mind if I come in and look around, just to be thorough? Her heart hammered against her ribs, but Cordelia kept her expression neutral. I was just about to close up, Sheriff. It's been a long day, and I still have preparations to make for tomorrow's remedies. Won't take but a minute, madam. Cordelia hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course, though I can't imagine what you expect to find. Sheriff Evans entered, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. His gaze swept over the neatly organized shelves of tinctures, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, and the counter where she mixed her remedies. He approached the curtained doorway that led to the back room. Just through there is my private quarters and workspace, Cordelia said, stepping forward to block his path. I keep my more valuable ingredients locked away. I'd prefer to maintain my privacy, Sheriff. Evans stared at her for a long moment. The man we're looking for is dangerous, Miss Kincaid. Miles Donovan, former cavalry scout turned bounty hunter. Now it seems he's added bank robbery to his resume. The name sent a chill through her. The man bleeding out in her back room wasn't just any cowboy, he was a bounty hunter. What had she gotten herself into? I haven't seen anyone matching that description, she said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, a thud from the back room cut her off. Sheriff Evans' hand immediately went to his gun. What was that? He demanded. Cordelia's mind raced. My cat, she blurted. Temperamental beast. Always knocking things over. You don't have a cat, Miss Kincaid. Whole town knows you're allergic to them. She cursed inwardly. I'm looking after Mrs. Hollister's while she visits her sister and boys. The sheriff's eyes narrowed with suspicion. I'm going to need to check that room. Cordelia planted herself more firmly in the doorway. Sheriff, I must insist. Step aside, Miss Kincaid, he ordered, his voice hardening, or I'll have to consider you an accomplice. For a heartbeat, Cordelia considered her options. She barely knew the man in her back room. He could indeed be a bank robber, a criminal. Yet something in his desperate plea made her doubt the sheriff's version of events. Very well, she relented, stepping aside, but I protest this intrusion. Sheriff Evans pushed past the curtain, Cordelia following close behind. Her heart sank as they entered the back room, but to her astonishment, there was no sign of Miles Donovan. The blanket lay crumpled on the floor where she'd left it, but the man himself had vanished. The sheriff inspected the room thoroughly, even checking under the work table and behind the storage shelves. He paused at the small window, which stood slightly ajar. This window was open, Cordelia nodded, for ventilation. Some of my preparations produce strong vapors. Evans approached the window, sticking his head out to look in both directions. After a moment, he withdrew with a grunt of frustration. Seems I've wasted your time, Miss Kincaid. I apologize for the intrusion. He replaced his hat. If you do see anything suspicious, you'll send word right away. Of course, Sheriff, she promised, relief flooding through her. She showed him out, locked the door behind him, and leaned against it, her legs suddenly weak. Where had Miles Donovan gone? And why had she lied to protect him? The answer to her first question came moments later, when a floorboard creaked beneath the work table. Cordelia watched in amazement as the man emerged from a narrow space between the floorboards, a hidden storage compartment her father had built to keep his most valuable medicines safe from potential thieves. You're full of surprises, she said, helping him up. His face was pale from the effort, fresh blood seeping through his bandage. Had to move fast when I heard voices, he grunted, grimacing in pain. Probably tore your neat stitchwork. I didn't stitch you yet, Cordelia replied, guiding him to a chair. I was waiting for you to wake up. Now sit still while I finish my work." Miles Donovan watched her silently as she gathered fresh bandages and her needle and thread. His eyes, a striking shade of green flecked with gold, followed her every movement. "Why did you lie for me?" he finally asked as she prepared to stitch his wound. Cordelia paused, needle in hand. "I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps because you asked me to hide something rather than steal it. A thief would have taken what he wanted." "You have good instincts," he said, wincing as she began to stitch. "Sheriff Evans has the story backwards. I didn't rob the bank. I was trying to stop it." "Then why are you the one with a bullet in you?" "Because I got there too late. The real robbers were already gone, and the teller panicked when he saw my gun." Miles grimaced. "Shot first, asked questions never." Cordelia tied off the last stitch and began wrapping his shoulder. "And the sheriff? Evans and I have history. Bad history. He's had it in for me since I brought in a wanted man he'd been protecting his brother-in-law." Miles looked directly into her eyes. "He'd rather believe I'm guilty than admit there might be other criminals in his town." "The watch and key you gave me," Cordelia said, reaching into her pocket. "What are they?" Miles shook his head. "Better you don't know yet. Just keep them hidden." He attempted to stand but swayed dangerously. "I need to get moving before Evans comes back with reinforcements." Cordelia pushed him gently back into the chair. "You've lost too much blood. You won't make it a mile in your condition." She chewed her lip, considering. "There's a room above the shop. My father built it as a sick room for patients who needed overnight observation. You can stay there until you're stronger." "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Miles asked, searching her face. "Because," she said after a moment, "in my experience, a guilty man doesn't stick around to explain himself, and I'd like to hear your explanation." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." Getting Miles up the narrow staircase to the sick room proved challenging. By the time they reached the top, his skin was clammy with sweat, and Cordelia feared the wound might start bleeding again. She settled him on the narrow bed and brought up water, some bread and cheese, and a dose of willow bark tea for the pain. "Rest now," she instructed. "We can talk more in the morning." As she turned to leave, his hand caught hers. "Thank you, Miss Kincaid, Cordelia Kincaid, Miss Kincaid." He released her hand. "I won't forget this." Sleep eluded Cordelia that night. She lay awake in her small bedroom behind the shop, listening for any sound that might indicate Miles was in distress or that the sheriff had returned. The pocket watch and key sat on her bedside table, the silver gleaming in the moonlight that filtered through her curtains. What had she done? Harboring a man the law was hunting could cost her everything: her business, her reputation, perhaps even her freedom. Yet something about Miles Donovan's story rang true, and she'd learned long ago to trust her instincts. Morning brought no clarity, only the usual routine of opening the shop and tending to the steady stream of customers seeking remedies for everything from toothaches to female complaints. Between customers, Cordelia slipped upstairs to check on her patient. She found Miles awake, sitting up in bed, examining the collection of medical books on the small shelf beside him. "Your father was a doctor?" he asked when she entered. Cordelia nodded, setting down the tray of food she'd brought. "Yes, though not formally trained. He learned from another doctor during the war, then set up practice in various frontier towns. He taught me everything he knew." "And your mother died when I was young. It was just father and me until 2 years ago." She checked his bandage, pleased to find no fresh bleeding. "You have some color back in your face today." "I heal quick," he said. "Always have." Cordelia sat on the edge of the bed. "I think it's time you told me exactly what happened at the bank, Mr. Donovan." Miles sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I've been tracking a gang for months. The Farrow brothers. They've hit banks across 3 territories, always the same pattern: small towns, middle of the day, in and out in minutes. And you're a bounty hunter, he nodded. Among other things, I've worked as a scout, a ranch hand, even a deputy marshal for a spell. But hunting men who need hunting pays better. So you followed these Pharaoh brothers to Lewiston. Got wind they were planning something here. I arrived yesterday, started asking around. Too many questions, I guess, because someone recognized me from a previous job and told Evans I was in town. Miles shifted, wincing at the movement. I was watching the bank when I saw them go in, 3 men, faces covered. By the time I got across the street, they were already running out the back. The teller saw my gun, panicked, and shot me. Then Evans showed up, saw me bleeding, and jumped to conclusions. What about the watch and key? Miles hesitated. The Pharaohs don't just take money. They take something personal from each bank. They hit something to prove they were there. Like trophies. At the last bank in Montana, they took a gold pocket watch belonging to the bank president. So this watch belongs to someone important, someone who'll want it back badly enough to pay. He looked away. The key is to a deposit box. I managed to grab it from one of the brothers during the scuffle. I don't know what's in it, but they came back for it. Cordelia's eyes widened. That's why they shot you. I believe so, and they won't stop looking until they find it. His green eyes locked with hers. Which is why I need to leave as soon as possible. I've put you in enough danger already. You're not strong enough yet, she insisted. Another day or 2 of rest, at least. Before Miles could argue, the bell above the shop door jingled. Cordelia quickly pressed a finger to her lips and hurried downstairs. The next 3 days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Cordelia tended her shop during the day, bringing food and fresh bandages to Miles when she could slip away unnoticed. In the evenings after closing, they would talk for hours. She learned that Miles had grown up in Missouri, the son of a horse trader. That he'd been a scout for the Union Army, despite being just 16 when the war ended. That he'd wandered west afterward, picking up skills and scars in equal measure. He spoke little of the men he'd hunted or the battles he'd fought, but the shadows that sometimes crossed his face told their own story. In turn, she told him about her childhood, traveling from town to town with her father. About learning to identify herbs and prepare remedies. About her dream of someday building a proper clinic where she could treat patients regardless of their ability to pay. On the 4th day, Sheriff Evans returned, this time with a poster bearing Miles' likeness and the words "Wanted." Armed robbery printed beneath. $500 reward, Evans announced, slapping the poster down on her counter. Figure that might jog your memory if you've seen him. Cordelia studied the crude drawing, which captured Miles' features well enough to be recognizable. I haven't seen this man, Sheriff. Evans leaned across the counter. There's something you're not telling me, Miss Kincaid. You've been closing shop early, turning away customers at odd hours. That's not like you. Her heart raced, but Cordelia maintained her calm exterior. I've been experimenting with new remedies. Some require precise timing and concentration. Is that so? Evans straightened. Well, I've deputized some men to help search. We'll be conducting house-to-house searches tomorrow, starting at dawn. After the sheriff left, Cordelia rushed upstairs to find Miles already dressed in his cleaned and mended clothes. I heard, he said grimly. I need to leave tonight. You're still weak, she protested, strong enough to ride. He buckled on his gun belt, checking the revolver before holstering it. I can't thank you enough for what you've done, Miss Kincaid. Not many would have taken such a risk for a stranger. Cordelia felt a tightness in her chest at the thought of him leaving. In just 4 days, Miles Donovan had somehow become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Where will you go? She asked. Better you don't know, but I'll settle this business with the pharaohs one way or another." He held out his hand. "I'll need the watch and key now." Cordelia hesitated before retrieving them from her hiding place. "Be careful," she said, placing them in his palm, their fingers brushing. "The pharaohs sound dangerous." "They are," he agreed, "which is why I need to draw them away from Lewiston, away from you." The way he looked at her then made her breath catch. Before she could respond, Miles took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Thank you for saving my life, Cordelia Kincaid." He slipped out the back door after nightfall, and Cordelia watched from the window as his shadow disappeared into the darkness, fighting an inexplicable urge to call him back. The house-to-house search came the next morning as promised. Sheriff Evans and his deputies were thorough, but found nothing in Cordelia's shop or living quarters to indicate Miles had been there. After they left, she breathed a sigh of relief, but the feeling was short-lived. 3 days later, as she was closing shop, a stranger entered, a tall man with cold eyes and a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. "Shop's closed," Cordelia said, her hand discreetly moving to the small knife she kept under the counter. "Not looking for medicine, madam," the man replied, his voice oddly gentle for his intimidating appearance. "Looking for information about a friend of mine. Tall fellow, dark hair, might have had a bullet wound." Cordelia's blood ran cold. "I haven't treated any gunshot wounds recently." The man smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "Funny thing is, I followed a blood trail right to your back door days ago. Would have come in then, but there were too many people about." He moved closer. "I'm a pharaoh. My brothers and I are mighty concerned about our friend." So this was one of the notorious Pharaoh brothers. Cordelia swallowed her fear and met his gaze steadily. "As I told Sheriff Evans, I haven't seen anyone matching that description." "Sheriff's looking for Miles Donovan," Ellie said, examining a bottle of tonic on the counter. "I'm looking for something Miles might have given you, something that don't belong to him." "I don't know what you're talking about." Ellie's pleasant demeanor suddenly vanished. He swept his arm across the counter, sending bottles crashing to the floor. "Don't play games with me, woman." "Where's the watch? Where's the key?" Cordelia backed away, gripping her knife tightly. "Get out of my shop." Ellie vaulted over the counter, grabbing her arm and twisting until she dropped the knife. "My brothers are waiting outside. We can do this quiet-like, or we can burn this place to the ground with you in it. Your choice." "He's gone," Cordelia gasped. "Left days ago, took everything with him." Ellie tightened his grip. "Where'd he go?" "I don't know. South, maybe. He didn't say." The outlaw studied her face, then abruptly released her. "If you're lying to me, I'll come back and finish what I started." He backed toward the door. "And if he returns, you tell him Pharaoh says hello." After he left, Cordelia sank to the floor among the broken glass and spilled remedies, shaking uncontrollably. What had she gotten herself into? And where was Miles now? She received her answer just after midnight when a tap at her window startled her awake. Cautiously approaching, she peered through the curtain to see Miles crouched on the small balcony outside, his finger pressed to his lips. Cordelia opened the window, relief and anger flooding through her in equal measure. "What are you doing back here?" she whispered furiously. "The pharaohs came looking for you." "I know," Miles replied, climbing inside. "I've been watching the town. Saw Ellie leave your shop." His eyes darkened with concern. "Did he hurt you?" "No," she said, though she rubbed her arm where bruises were forming. "But he threatened to burn the shop down." "Miles, these men are not just bank robbers. They're killers." "That's why I came back," he said, taking her hands. "I couldn't leave you unprotected, not after I put you in danger." "So what's your plan? Hide out in my shop again until Sheriff Evans comes back with more men?" "Or until the pharaohs decide to make good on their threat?" Miles shook his head. No more hiding. I'm going to end this, but first, I need your help one more time. With what? The key opens a deposit box at the bank. I need to know what's in it, what the pharaohs are really after. Cordelia stared at him. You want me to break into the bank? Not break in. Walk in as a respectable businesswoman making a withdrawal. He produced a folded paper from his pocket. I found this in the saddlebag of one of their horses. It's a bank draft with the signature of Harold Bishop, the bank manager. You want me to forge a bank draft? The draft is real. I just need you to present it along with the key and ask to access the deposit box it's connected to. Cordelia paced the small room. This is madness. If I'm caught, you won't be, Miles assured her. Bishop's out of town until next week. The teller who shot me is still recovering at home. No one will question a transaction with proper documentation. She stopped pacing. And what will you be doing while I'm committing fraud? Tracking the pharaohs. They're staying at the old Wilkins place outside town. Once I know what's in that box, I'll understand what they're really after and how to stop them. Cordelia studied his face in the moonlight. Despite everything, she trusted him. Perhaps it was foolish, but in the days he'd been gone, she'd realized how much she missed his presence, his voice, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Fine, she said at last. But after this, I want the whole truth. Everything you know about the pharaohs, about the watch, about why you're really hunting them. No more secrets. Miles nodded solemnly. You have my word. The next morning, Cordelia entered the bank wearing her best dress and a confidence she didn't feel. The young clerk at the counter, a replacement for the injured teller, smiled politely as she approached. Good morning, Miss Kincaid. How may I help you today? Cordelia placed the bank draft and key on the counter. I need to access a deposit box, please. The clerk examined the draft, then the key. This appears to be in order. If you'll follow me. He led her to a small room at the back of the bank where rows of metal boxes lined the walls. Finding the one that matched her key, he inserted it, turned, and pulled the box out. I'll give you some privacy, madam. Just ring the bell when you're finished. Once alone, Cordelia opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be land deeds and maps, along with a smaller envelope. She quickly slipped the envelope into her reticule and replaced the portfolio, closing the box before ringing for the clerk. Miles was waiting in the alley behind her shop when she returned. His face was grim, his clothes dusty from riding. Did you get it? He asked. Cordelia handed him the envelope. What is it? What are the pharaohs after? Miles opened the envelope and removed several folded papers. As he read, his expression grew increasingly troubled. It's worse than I thought, he said finally. These are government documents, land grants for territory that's currently part of the Nez Perce Reservation north of here. Cordelia frowned. I don't understand. Someone's trying to steal Indian land legally on paper. These documents have federal seals, but they're dated next month. They're forgeries, meant to be discovered after something happens to force the Nez Perce off their land. What could force them? Cordelia stopped as understanding dawned. The pharaohs. They're going to attack the reservation. Miles nodded grimly. Create an incident, make it look like the Nez Perce are hostile. The army would have no choice but to respond. Once the Indians are removed, the land becomes available to whoever holds the grants, Cordelia finished. But who would orchestrate such a scheme? I have my suspicions, Miles said, tucking the papers away. The watch you were keeping for me belonged to Senator James Whitlock. He's been pushing for expansion into Indian territories for years. A senator is behind this, him or someone with similar influence. The pharaohs are just hired guns. Miles looked at her intently. Cordelia, I need to get these documents to the federal marshal in Boise. It's the only way to stop what's coming. What about the pharaohs? They're still here, still dangerous. That's why I want you to come with me. Cordelia blinked in surprise. Leave Lewiston, my shop. Just for a few days, he said, taking her hands. The pharaohs know you helped me. They'll come back, especially once they realize the documents are gone. His grip tightened. I can't protect you if I'm riding to Boise, and I can't let these papers fall into the wrong hands. She knew he was right. The logical choice was to go with him, yet leaving everything she'd built felt like surrendering. What about Sheriff Evans? Won't he come after you? Evans is the least of our worries right now. Miles searched her face. Please, Cordelia, I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. She thought of Pharaoh's threat, of the malice in his eyes, of the innocent people on the reservation who would suffer if this plan succeeded, and of the man before her who had trusted her with his life and now trusted her to help him save others. When do we leave? She asked. Relief flooded his features. Tonight after dark. Pack only what you can carry on horseback. As Cordelia prepared to leave her home and business, possibly for the last time, she wondered what her father would think of her decision. He had always taught her that healing meant more than mixing remedies, it meant preventing harm when possible. Perhaps this was her way of honoring that teaching. Miles returned after midnight with 2 horses. Cordelia had packed her medical supplies, some clothing, and her father's most precious medical books. She left a note for Mrs. Hollister, asking her to look after the shop, claiming a family emergency had called her away. They rode hard through the night, avoiding the main roads. Miles was a skilled tracker, leading them through forest paths and dry creek beds where their trail would be difficult to follow. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Lewiston, but Miles insisted they continue. The pharaohs will realize the documents are gone by morning, he explained during a brief stop to rest the horses. They'll come after us with everything they have. Cordelia, sore and exhausted from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, nodded grimly. How far to Boise? 3 days hard riding if we're not delayed. He handed her his canteen. I'm sorry to push so hard. I know this isn't easy for you. I made my choice, she said, taking a long drink. I just hope it was the right one. Miles' expression softened. For what it's worth, I think your father would be proud of you. You never met him. No, but I've met you. He remounted his horse. Come on. We should reach the Snake River by midday. There's a ferry crossing there. They pushed on through rough country, the landscape changing from dense forest to rocky plateaus. Cordelia, despite her exhaustion, found herself appreciating the wild beauty around them. She had rarely ventured far from Lewiston since settling there, and the vastness of the territory was both intimidating and exhilarating. By mid-afternoon, they reached the Snake River, its waters flowing swift and deep between steep banks. The ferry was a simple affair, a wooden platform suspended between pontoons, pulled across the river by ropes. The ferryman, an elderly man with skin like tanned leather, eyed them suspiciously. $2 for you and the horses, he said gruffly. Miles paid him, then led the horses onto the platform. As the ferryman began the laborious process of pulling them across, Miles scanned the shoreline behind them. You think we're being followed? Cordelia asked quietly. It's safer to assume we are, he replied. The pharaohs know these territories as well as I do. They won't stay on the main roads either. Halfway across the river, a movement on the bank caught Cordelia's attention. 3 riders appeared, their horses kicking up dust as they approached the ferry landing. Miles, she whispered urgently, nodding toward the riders. He turned, his hand instinctively going to his gun. Pharaohs, he confirmed grimly. The ferryman, seeing the approaching riders, began pulling faster, his weathered hands working the ropes with surprising strength. "Friends of yours?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "Not exactly," Miles replied. "How much to cut the rope once we're across?" The old man barked a laugh. "More than you can afford, mister. $5. Make it 10. Miles nodded tersely. "Deal." They reached the far bank just as the pharaohs arrived at the ferry landing. Illy, whom Cordelia recognized from the shop, shouted and waved his hat, signaling the ferryman to return. Miles helped Cordelia onto her horse, then pressed $10 into the ferryman's palm. "Remember our arrangement." The old man pocketed the money with a toothless grin. "What arrangement? I ain't seen nobody today." As they galloped away from the river, Cordelia glanced back to see the ferryman cutting the rope with a knife, sending the ferry platform drifting downstream. Pharaoh's enraged shouts echoed across the water. "That won't stop them for long," Miles said. "They'll find another crossing or swim the horses across if necessary, but it buys us time." They rode hard until nightfall, finally stopping in a sheltered canyon where a small stream provided water for themselves and the horses. Miles built a small fire, keeping it low to minimize smoke. "We should be safe enough for a few hours," he said, unpacking some dried beef and hardtack. "Eat something, then try to get some sleep. I'll take first watch." Cordelia accepted the food gratefully. Her muscles ached from the long day's ride and exhaustion weighed heavily on her, yet her mind was racing too fast for sleep. "Tell me about the watch," she said as they ate. "Why is it important?" Miles pulled it from his pocket, the silver gleaming in the firelight. "It's not just any watch. It's a gift from President Grant to Senator Whitlock with an inscription inside." He opened it, revealing the engraved words, "To J.W. for service to the nation. USG. And you think the senator is involved in this land scheme?" The documents were in a deposit box that this watch's key opens, and I found it in the possession of men hired to create a false Indian uprising. Miles closed the watch with a snap. "Yes, I think he's involved. The question is whether he's directing it or just a convenient tool for someone else." Cordelia wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders against the night chill. "What made you start hunting the pharaohs in the first place? This seems beyond the usual work of a bounty hunter." Miles was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I was a scout for the 7th Cavalry under Custer before I left the Army. I've seen what happens when greedy men decide that Indian land is worth more than Indian lives." He looked up, his eyes reflecting the flames. "Last year I was tracking a fugitive near a small Cheyenne camp. While I was there, 3 men rode in shooting. They killed 4 people, including a child, before riding off. I went after them but lost their trail in a storm." "The pharaohs," Cordelia guessed. Miles nodded. "I didn't know who they were then, but I made it my business to find out. Spent months tracking rumors, bounties, witnesses. Eventually identified them as the Pharaoh brothers Illy, Samuel, and Jasper. They've worked as hired guns, cattle rustlers, bank robbers, whatever pays. And now they're being paid to start a war with the Nez Perce." "Exactly. When I realized what they were planning, I couldn't just collect a bounty and walk away. Too many innocent lives at stake." He added a small branch to the fire. "You should get some sleep now. We've got another long day tomorrow." Cordelia wanted to ask more, but exhaustion was rapidly overtaking her. She lay down, using her saddle as a pillow, and was asleep within minutes. The sound of Miles loading his revolver woke her sometime later. The fire had burned down to embers and the moon hung high overhead. "What is it?" she whispered, instantly alert. "Not sure," he murmured, eyes scanning the darkness beyond their camp. "Thought I heard something." Cordelia listened, hearing nothing but the soft gurgle of the stream and the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof. Then came a new sound, the faint click of metal against stone. Miles moved swiftly, pulling her to her feet and toward the horses. "Mount up. Now." No sooner had they reached the horses than a shot rang out, the bullet splintering a tree trunk where Cordelia had been sleeping moments before. Miles returned fire, aiming at the muzzle flash visible on the ridge above them. "Ride," he shouted, practically throwing her onto her horse. "Follow the stream down the canyon." Cordelia urged her horse forward, hearing more shots behind her as Miles provided covering fire. The canyon was dark, the stream bed rocky and treacherous. She leaned low over her horse's neck, trusting the animal to find secure footing. The sound of hoofbeats behind her sent a spike of fear through her heart until Miles' voice called out, "Keep going. Don't stop." They galloped down the canyon until it opened into a broader valley. Only then did Miles signal for her to slow. How did they find us so quickly? Cordelia gasped, her heart still pounding. "They're good trackers," Miles replied grimly, "and they know this territory." He glanced back the way they'd come. "I winged one of them, I think, but that won't slow them down for long. What now? We change our plans. Boys is still 2 days away, and they'll be expecting us to head there." He studied the starlit landscape. "There's a small settlement about 15 miles east of here, Pine Ridge. It's off the main routes, mostly miners and a few homesteaders. They've got a telegraph office. We send word to the marshal instead of delivering the documents in person," Cordelia realized. Miles nodded. "It's our best chance. We can hole up there, send the telegram, and wait for the marshal to arrive." They rode through the remainder of the night, changing direction frequently to confuse any pursuit. As dawn broke, the terrain began to change, becoming more mountainous. Pine forests replaced the open grasslands, providing cover but making travel slower. "Not much farther," Miles assured her as they paused to rest the horses near a small spring. "Should reach Pine Ridge by noon." Cordelia dismounted stiffly, her muscles protesting after hours in the saddle. As she stretched, she noticed Miles favoring his left arm. "You're hurt," she said, moving to his side. "It's nothing. Bullet grazed my arm during the firefight." Cordelia insisted on examining the wound, a deep furrow across his bicep that had bled freely before clotting. "This needs cleaning and bandaging," she said firmly, reaching for her medical bag. "We don't have time, make time," she interrupted. "An infection will slow us down more than a 5-minute stop to dress this properly." Miles submitted with a sigh as she cleaned the wound with water from the spring and a small amount of whiskey from his saddlebag. Her touch was gentle but efficient as she applied a salve and wrapped the arm in clean bandages. "You're good at that," he commented, watching her work. "I've had plenty of practice." She tied off the bandage. "Though usually my patients aren't being pursued by murderous outlaws." Miles chuckled, then grew serious. "Thank you, Cordelia, not just for this, for everything. I've dragged you into a dangerous situation, away from your home and livelihood. I'm sorry for that." She met his gaze. "You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to help you because I believe you're doing the right thing." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition of the bond that had formed since that first day when he'd collapsed at her door. Cordelia felt her heartbeat quicken as Miles reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "We should get moving," he said softly, his hand lingering. The spell was broken by the distant sound of a gunshot, echoing through the hills. Miles immediately tensed, scanning the horizon. "That came from the direction of Pine Ridge," he said, helping her quickly pack her supplies. "Could be hunters, but it could be the Pharaohs," Cordelia finished. "They might have guessed where we're heading." They mounted swiftly, approaching Pine Ridge with caution. The settlement came into view around midday, a cluster of rough buildings nestled in a small valley, with a creek running alongside it. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and figures moved between the structures, apparently going about normal business. "Seems peaceful enough," Cordelia observed. Miles wasn't convinced. Too quiet. No horses at the hitching posts outside the saloon. It's midday, there should be more activity. They remained hidden in the tree line, observing the settlement for nearly half an hour. Nothing appeared amiss, yet Miles' instincts warned him of danger. "I'll go in alone," he decided finally. "Find the telegraph office, send our message, and get back. You stay here with the horses." "And if you don't come back?" Cordelia asked, her voice tight with concern. "Wait until dark, then head northwest. There's an army outpost about 30 miles from here. Give them the documents and tell them everything." She gripped his arm. "Be careful." Miles covered her hand with his own. "Always am." Then, to her surprise, he leaned forward and pressed a brief, fierce kiss to her lips. "For luck," he murmured, before turning his horse toward the settlement. Cordelia watched him ride slowly into Pine Ridge, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. Her heart was torn between fear for his safety and the sudden, certain knowledge that she had fallen in love with Miles Donovan. From her vantage point, she could see him dismount outside what appeared to be the general store, tie his horse, and enter. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Something was wrong. The telegraph office shouldn't take this long. Just as she was debating whether to follow him, the door of the general store burst open. Miles emerged, running, as gunfire erupted from several buildings simultaneously. He dove behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood around him. Cordelia gasped as she recognized Lee Farrow stepping onto the porch of the saloon, rifle raised. 2 other men, presumably his brothers, emerged from buildings on either side of the street, effectively trapping Miles in the middle. Without conscious thought, Cordelia urged her horse forward, drawing Miles' spare revolver from his saddlebag. She had never fired a gun in anger, but her father had insisted she learn for protection on the frontier. Now, she silently thanked him for that foresight. As she galloped into town, she fired twice into the air. The unexpected attack from behind caused the Farrows to momentarily divert their attention, just enough for Miles to make a dash toward the livery stable. Bullets whizzed past Cordelia as she rode hard toward him. Miles saw her coming and changed direction, running toward her instead. As she approached, he grabbed her outstretched hand and swung up behind her in one fluid motion. "Ride," he shouted, wrapping one arm around her waist while firing back at their pursuers with his other hand. Cordelia needed no urging. She bent low over the horse's neck, feeling its powerful muscles bunch and stretch as it galloped back toward the trees. Behind them, she heard the Farrows scrambling for their own horses, their shouts carrying on the wind. "The telegraph office was destroyed," Miles told her as they reached the cover of the forest. "They got here before us, took the whole settlement hostage. The people there, locked in the church. Alive as far as I could tell." He glanced back. "We need to split up. They'll be after us within minutes." "No," Cordelia said firmly, guiding the horse deeper into the trees. "We stay together." "Cordelia, I'm not arguing about this, Miles. We have a better chance together than separated." He relented, directing her toward a deer trail that wound through the densest part of the forest. "Head for that ridge," he said, pointing. "There's a network of caves up there. We can lose them in the rocks." The horse was laboring now under their combined weight, but Cordelia urged it onward, hearing the sounds of pursuit growing closer. The steep slope toward the ridge was challenging, forcing them to dismount and lead the tired animal. "Leave it," Miles said when the horse stumbled for the third time. "We'll move faster on foot through these rocks." Cordelia hesitated, reluctant to abandon the loyal animal, but knew Miles was right. She quickly removed her medical bag and a small bundle of supplies, then slapped the horse's rump, sending it galloping back down the slope in a direction away from their pursuers. They climbed higher, the rocky terrain offering numerous hiding places but making progress slow and treacherous. Miles led her to a narrow opening between two boulders, barely visible unless one knew where to look. "In here," he whispered, helping her squeeze through the gap. Inside was a small cave, its ceiling just high enough to stand. A shaft of light filtered down from a crack in the roof, providing minimal illumination. "We should be safe here for a while," Miles said, moving to the entrance to listen for signs of pursuit. "They won't find this place easily." Cordelia sank down against the cool stone wall, finally allowing herself to feel the full extent of her exhaustion and fear. "What now?" "The telegraph is destroyed. We can't reach the marshal." Miles sat beside her, his shoulder pressing reassuringly against hers. "We rest, wait until dark, then make our way to the army outpost as planned. And if the pharaohs are watching for us, then we find another way," he said simply. "I won't let them win, Cordelia. Too much is at stake." They sat in silence for a time, listening to the occasional distant shout as the pharaohs searched the mountainside. Eventually, those sounds faded, though neither believed their pursuers had given up. As the light from the roof crack dimmed with the setting sun, Cordelia turned to Miles. "Why did you kiss me back there?" she asked softly. He looked at her in the fading light, his expression unreadable. "Because I might not get another chance." "Is that the only reason?" Miles reached out, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "No," he admitted. "I kissed you because I've wanted to since the moment I woke up in your shop and saw you mixing medicines with such concentration that you were biting your lower lip." Cordelia smiled, leaning into his touch. "I thought you were delirious with fever." "I was clear-headed enough to know a remarkable woman when I saw one." His hand moved to cup the back of her neck. "I've known many brave men in my time, Cordelia, but few with the courage you've shown these past days." "It's not courage," she whispered. "It's just doing what needs to be done." "That's the very definition of courage." He drew her closer. "I never expected to find someone like you, never thought I deserved to." This time, when their lips met, it was not brief or fierce but slow and tender, a promise rather than a goodbye. Cordelia's arms wound around his neck as she returned the kiss with all the emotion that had been building since he first entrusted her with his secrets. When they finally parted, Miles rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he murmured, "if we survive it, I want to court you properly. No danger, no running. Just a man calling on a woman he admires more than anyone he's ever known." Cordelia smiled in the darkness. "I'd like that very much." The moment of tenderness was shattered by the sound of rocks sliding outside their hiding place. Miles instantly pushed Cordelia behind him, drawing his gun and aiming at the entrance. The gap darkened as a figure blocked the fading light. "Found you," came Pharaoh's voice, cold and satisfied. Before Miles could fire, another voice called from outside. "Drop the gun, Donovan, or we start shooting into the cave. Narrow space like that, bullets will ricochet real nice." Miles hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon. "Let the woman go, Illy. She's got nothing to do with this." Illy's laugh was without humor. "She became involved the moment she helped you, Donovan." He gestured with his gun. "Both of you out here now." They emerged into the twilight to find all three Pharaoh brothers waiting. Samuel, the youngest, had a bandage wrapped around his upper arm, Miles' handiwork from their earlier encounter. Jasper, the eldest, was a tall man with a beard and cold eyes that reminded Cordelia of a predator. "Search them," Jasper ordered. Ellie roughly patted Miles down, finding the watch and key in his pocket and the documents inside his shirt. "Got him," he announced triumphantly. "Good." Jasper examined the papers, nodding in satisfaction before turning to Miles. "You've been a real thorn in our side, Donovan. Time to remove you permanently." "Wait," Cordelia stepped forward. "You have what you came for. You don't need to kill anyone." Jasper regarded her with mild curiosity. "Brave little thing, aren't you? But you're wrong. We very much need to kill you both. Can't have witnesses to what's coming." "If you're talking about the plan to force the Nez Perce off their land, it won't work," Miles said. "Too many people know about it now." "Who? The people in Pine Ridge," Illy scoffed. "They won't be talking to anyone for a while." Cordelia's blood ran cold. "What did you do to them?" "Nothing permanent," Jasper replied. "Just tied them up nice and tight in that church. By the time anyone finds them, our business will be concluded." He gestured to his brothers. "Tie their hands. We'll take them back to the ridge. More private there for what needs doing." As Samuel approached with a length of rope, Miles suddenly lunged forward, slamming into him and sending them both tumbling to the ground. Illy raised his gun, but Cordelia, acting on instinct, threw a handful of dirt into his face. He cursed, firing blindly as she ducked behind a boulder. The mountainside erupted into chaos. Miles and Samuel grappled on the ground, while Jasper and Illy fired at the boulder where Cordelia had taken cover. She crawled rapidly between rocks, trying to circle behind them. A shout of pain told her someone had been hit, but in the growing darkness she couldn't tell who. Then Miles' voice rang out. "Cordelia, run." "Head north," she hesitated, torn between fleeing and helping. In that moment of indecision, a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her to her feet. "Gotcha," Illy growled, his face streaked with dirt and blood from where he'd been grazed by his own ricochet. On the ground nearby, Miles was pinned beneath Jasper, while Samuel lay unmoving several feet away. Miles' face was bloodied, but his eyes found Cordelia's with fierce determination. "It's over, Donovan," Jasper said, pressing his gun to Miles' temple. "Any last words before I send you to meet your maker?" "Just one," Miles replied. "Duck." A gunshot cracked through the twilight and Jasper jerked backward, a red stain blossoming on his shoulder. More shots followed in rapid succession, sending Illy diving for cover and releasing Cordelia in the process. "U.S. Marshal, throw down your weapons." The command came from above them on the ridge, where several figures were silhouetted against the darkening sky. Illy fired up at them, only to be answered by a barrage that splintered the rocks around him. Taking advantage of the distraction, Miles rolled free of the wounded Jasper and scrambled toward Cordelia. "This way," he gasped, pulling her toward a cluster of boulders as the gunfight intensified behind them. They had just reached cover when Farrow appeared in front of them, his face contorted with rage. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled, raising his gun. Miles pushed Cordelia aside as Illy fired. She heard Miles grunt with impact, saw him stagger but somehow keep his feet. Before Illy could fire again, a shot rang out from the ridge above, catching him squarely in the chest. He fell forward, dead before he hit the ground. "Miles!" Cordelia cried, rushing to his side as he leaned heavily against a boulder. "Where are you hit?" sighed. He managed, his hand pressed to his ribs where blood seeped between his fingers. "Not too bad." Voices approached, men calling to each other, boots crunching on gravel. A tall figure appeared beside them, holding a lantern. "Miles Donovan?" the man asked, his badge catching the light. "Marshal James Colby. Looks like we arrived just in time." "How did you find us?" Cordelia asked, supporting Miles' weight against her. "Telegraph from Lewiston," the marshal replied. Sheriff Evans received word that the Pharaoh gang was in the area and suspected they were planning something big. When he learned you two had left town suddenly, he connected the dots and wired me and boys. Evans helped us," Miles said incredulously, wincing as Cordelia examined his wound. "Apparently, he received some convincing evidence that you weren't involved in the bank robbery." The marshal held up a familiar silver watch. "Found this on Jasper Pharaoh, along with some interesting documents about Nez Perce land." "Care to explain?" While his deputies secured the surviving Pharaoh brothers, Miles and Cordelia told the marshal everything: the planned attack on the reservation, the forged land grants, the suspected involvement of Senator Whitlock. "This is serious business," Colby said when they'd finished. "Land fraud involving a senator, Indian treaties being violated. This goes beyond my jurisdiction." He tucked the documents into his coat. "But I know some honest men in Washington who'll want to see these." He helped them down the mountain to where horses waited. One of his deputies had medical training and properly bandaged Miles' wound, a deep furrow across his ribs that was painful but not life-threatening. "We'll escort you back to Lewiston," Marshal Colby told them as they prepared to ride. "You'll both need to give formal statements about everything that's happened." The journey back was much less frantic than their flight had been. The marshal's presence ensured their safety, and they traveled at a pace that accommodated Miles' injury. Cordelia rode beside him, frequently checking his bandages and insisting he rest whenever he grew pale from pain or blood loss. On their second night, camped near the Snake River, Miles found her sitting alone by the fire after the others had retired. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling carefully beside her. "I should be asking you that," she replied, automatically reaching to check his forehead for fever. "Your wound is healing fine thanks to your care." He caught her hand, holding it against his chest. "But you haven't answered my question." Cordelia sighed, looking into the flames. "I'm processing. Everything happened so quickly. The bank, the Pharaohs, running for our lives." She gave a small, bewildered laugh. "A week ago, my biggest concern was whether my shipment of willow bark would arrive on time. Do you regret helping me?" Miles asked quietly. She turned to him, her expression softening. "No, despite everything, no, we prevented something terrible from happening." Her fingers laced with his. "And I found something I wasn't looking for." "What's that?" she said simply. Miles smiled, lifting their joined hands to kiss her knuckles. "I meant what I said in that cave, Cordelia. When we get back to Lewiston, if you'll allow it, I'd like to court you properly." "What about your life as a bounty hunter? Always on the move, always chasing the next fugitive." His expression grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that. Marshal Colby mentioned he could use a man with my skills in his office, a more settled position." "In boys?" Cordelia asked, her heart sinking slightly at the thought of the distance that would separate them. "Initially, yes. But marshals often have assignments in different parts of the territory." Miles' eyes held hers steadily. "Including Lewiston, where a certain apothecary has built a reputation as the finest healer in the region." Hope blossomed in Cordelia's chest. "That sounds like a compromise I could live with." "It's not just a compromise," Miles said earnestly. "It's a beginning, a chance to build something I never thought I'd have." He touched her cheek gently. "A home, a purpose beyond hunting men, and someone to share it with." Under the vast Idaho sky, with the fire crackling beside them and the future stretching out like the territory around them, wild and full of possibility, Cordelia leaned forward and kissed him. It was a kiss of promise, of certainty, sealing an understanding between them that needed no further words. They returned to Lewiston 3 days later, riding in with Marshal Colby and his deputies. News of their arrival spread quickly through the town, and by the time they reached the main street, curious onlookers had gathered. Sheriff Evans met them outside his office, his expression unreadable as Miles dismounted. "Donovan," he acknowledged stiffly. "Sheriff," Miles replied, equally reserved. Marshal Colby stepped between them. "Sheriff Evans, your telegram arrived just in time. Thanks to your information, we were able to prevent a serious crime and apprehend the Faro gang." Evans nodded, his gaze shifting to Cordelia. "Miss Kincaid, good to see you returned safely." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Your shop's been kept in good order by Mrs. Hollister, though there's been some grumbling about the lack of headache powders." Cordelia smiled, relieved to know her livelihood had survived her absence. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll remedy that situation immediately." Over the next several days, formal statements were taken, telegrams sent to authorities in Washington, and the surviving Faro brothers transferred to a more secure jail in Boise to await trial. Senator Whitlock, confronted with the evidence of his involvement, resigned his position rather than face a public scandal, though rumors persisted that higher officials had been complicit in the land scheme. The people of Pine Ridge were found, as Jasper had said, bound in the church, but otherwise unharmed. They provided additional testimony against the Faros, ensuring that the brothers would face justice for their crimes. For Miles and Cordelia, life gradually returned to a semblance of normality. Her apothecary reopened, busier than ever as customers came as much for gossip about her adventure as for her remedies. Miles took a room at the hotel while his wound healed completely, and true to his word, began calling on her in a manner that left no doubt about his intentions. Their courtship became the talk of Lewiston. The respectable apothecary and the former bounty hunter made an unlikely pair, yet those who saw them together could not deny the genuine affection between them. Miles would arrive each evening after Cordelia closed her shop, sometimes with wildflowers gathered during his rides, other times with a book he thought she might enjoy. 3 months after their return, Marshal Colby arrived in Lewiston with news. He had secured Miles a position as deputy marshal for the northern Idaho Territory, with Lewiston as his primary posting. The position came with a modest salary, but the stability, Miles had spoken of that night by the fire. "It's official, then," Cordelia said that evening as they walked along the river. "You're staying in Lewiston." "I'm staying," Miles confirmed, squeezing her hand, "though the living arrangements might need some consideration." "Oh." She glanced up at him, noting the nervous energy that seemed to radiate from him. Miles stopped walking, turning to face her. The setting sun cast golden light across the water, illuminating his features as he reached into his pocket. "Cordelia Kincaid," he began, withdrawing a small ring with a single pearl set in silver. "When I stumbled into your shop that day, bleeding and desperate, I had no idea I was actually stumbling into my future. You saved my life, protected my secrets, and somewhere along the way claimed my heart entirely." He dropped to one knee, holding the ring up to her. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Cordelia's eyes as she looked down at this man who had changed her life so completely. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I will marry you, Miles Donovan." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. They were married on a clear autumn day, with the mountains visible in the distance, and the trees along the river turned to gold and crimson. The ceremony was simple but well attended. It seemed all of Lewiston wanted to witness the union of their apothecary and the deputy marshal. Even Sheriff Evans came, offering Miles a grudging handshake and Cordelia a rare smile. Marshal Colby stood as Miles' best man while Mrs. Hollister, who had become Cordelia's closest friend and occasional assistant at the shop, served as matron of honor. As they exchanged vows beneath an arbor decorated with late-blooming wildflowers, Cordelia thought of how unlikely their journey had been from a wounded stranger and a reluctant healer to husband and wife. After the ceremony, as guests celebrated with food and music in the town square, Miles led his new bride away for a moment of quiet. "Happy, Mrs. Donovan?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Extremely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I may still use Miss Kincaid professionally, my patients are used to it." "Whatever you wish," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "As long as you're mine when the day is done." Cordelia turned in his arms to face him. "Always. Though I must confess, I never imagined my life would take such a turn." "No regrets, then, about the danger, the excitement, the rather unconventional beginning to our relationship?" She smiled up at him, her fingers tracing the now healed scar on his temple, a reminder of the bullet that had brought him to her door. "Not one. Every choice led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." As they rejoined their guests, surrounded by the community that had become their home, Cordelia reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought Miles Donovan into her life. A gunshot, a secret, a desperate plea for help, the beginning of a love story she would never have dared to imagine for herself. In the years that followed, Miles served with distinction as deputy marshal, earning respect throughout the territory for his fair-mindedness and courage. Cordelia's apothecary flourished, eventually expanding to include a small clinic where she could treat patients with more serious conditions. Together, they built a life of purpose and contentment, their home becoming a gathering place for friends and a safe haven for those in need. Their family grew with the birth of a son, William, named for Cordelia's father, and later a daughter, Eleanor. The children grew up hearing carefully edited versions of their parents' adventurous meeting, though the full story would wait until they were older. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Miles and Cordelia would often sit on their porch, watching the stars emerge over the distant mountains. Sometimes they would speak of the past of the pharaohs, now serving lengthy prison sentences, of Senator Whitlock, who had died in disgrace, of the Nez Perce, whose land had been preserved at least for a time by their actions. But more often, they spoke of the present and the future of their children's accomplishments, of improvements to the town, of plans for the coming seasons. And sometimes, they didn't speak at all, content in the silence of deep understanding that had grown between them. On the 10th anniversary of the day Miles had first stumbled into Cordelia's shop, he presented her with a gift, the silver pocket watch, polished and repaired, retrieved from the evidence after the Pharaoh trial had concluded. "A reminder," he said as she turned it over in her hands, "of how a moment can change everything. How a secret shared can become a life built together." Cordelia smiled, remembering the frightened, bleeding man who had trusted her with his life and his truth. "I wouldn't change a moment of it," she said, leaning against the strength of his shoulder. "Not one single moment." As the sun set over Lewiston, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Miles wrapped his arm around his wife, grateful for the bullet that had brought him to her door and for every day since. What had begun as a desperate plea for help had become the greatest blessing of his life, a love story written in danger and trust, in secrets revealed, and truths freely given.